Hi friends, hello the world. Welcome back to this episode of Complaint Free Life. And with you, your host, Salon Wadawa. Today, the weather's sounding a bit grim, and I think also lately there have been more aerial alarms here where I am in Ukraine. So that I think is also stirring a lot of instinctual fear-based reactions of, oh my God, what if something happens? There is that element of it, but other than that, I think being here next to people I love, spending some time with them is, of course, precious and so worth everything else that I'm experiencing. So that's a bit about my life. And today, the topic that I want to talk about is the topic of failing ahead, which is, I think, often happens also during transitioning or before transitioning or wanting to transition in general. But I will also be talking in general what that means, how do we know that we're doing it, and what can be done about it if we detect that this is what we're doing. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is that I have been experiencing that recently, and I didn't even realize it until my coach pointed out to me. So that's why when my coach pointed out to me, I was like, oh my God, I'm a coach. I know all the things, but when it comes to your own brain, you may not really notice a lot of the things of what's happening. So I have been doing a self-analysis of what's happening and how I have been doing it, and what are the ways that I have been doing it, and what I did to stop it. So this is a fresh from my own experience of recently in April when I was evaluating my April months. So before we start, I want to talk about what it is that failing in advance, because oftentimes I think we're so focused on what happens if we fail, what happens if we fail in this way and that way, and how we're going to mitigate it, right? So we think a lot about what happens after we fail, but we don't often talk about, or we don't really think about what happens before even we fail, without actually even achieving those things that we want to. But we are failing ourselves ahead of time in the fear of failing later. So the definition of failing ahead is basically failing ourselves consciously, subconsciously, right? Like in my case, failing ourselves in advance in the fear of not actually failing by doing the thing that we want to do. So when we are experiencing that, how do we actually know that this is what's happening? Because it's not easy to detect it, especially if you are dealing with your own brain, right? So as I said, that even in my case, I did not realize it until my coach pointed out to me. So the way that you could observe and find out whether you are doing it or not in these ways. So let us say that you've decided to transition, and let us say that you've decided to get yourself ready and start doing certain things before you actually go and transition, right? So you start preparing like financial aspects, you start setting goals for how much money you want to be saving up for it, or you have decided to take certain courses, you've decided to write certain things, or you've decided to, I don't know, working on yourself and achieving certain goals so that you can start practicing yourself how to get all the goals that you want to be achieving. Or maybe you've started writing a business plan and then starting to see how it goes, and planning that, and then setting that a goal, and then having all of these plans. And the way that you would know that you are failing yourself in advance is, one of the major indicator, I would say, is a feeling. And that feeling is of hesitation and self-doubt, which then makes you change things in the process so that you don't go and actually achieve what you set out to achieve. So does that make sense? So if you've decided, for instance, you will this month, you will have saved this much money. And you've planned it out how you're going to do that, where you're going to cut your expenses and how you're going to prepare yourself and all of this stuff. And then you start living your life, working and doing all the things like life always happens. And then you don't really follow your plan, and you want to be just wanting to spend money, or you want to be doing other things, because you are not really sure if you really want to transition, or if transition is going to work out, if that money will be enough, what's the point of doing that. And then you start hesitating, you start doubting, and then you start changing things, and then in the end you don't have that amount that you want. Right? So one of the main indicators to watch out for is that hesitation, or that feeling of it's not, it may not work out in the long run, or I may not really achieve what I'm setting out to do or to achieve anyway, so what's the point? So then you want to keep changing things, you want to be modifying things, you want to be adding things or removing things, and then in the end, you will not really stick to your plan, and you will not really achieve your goal, and then you will not really know why you didn't achieve your goal, because you've made a lot of changes in the meantime and that you didn't really plan. So I have also written down several other things to watch out for. Is when you're failing yourself ahead of time, is when you are doing a job that's not really committed, that's not really like, barely doing it for the, what is the word I'm looking for the ticking, right? So I've done it like tick, but without really getting the result in that moment that you wanted, without really putting your efforts to doing it, and you just did it because of like in a non-committal, in a disbelief manner, and then you just checked it, but you really know that that's not maybe going to contribute to what you're wanting. So again, you are trying to fail ahead, so that later, when the actual goal was supposed to be achieved, if we didn't achieve it, we can just tell ourselves, well, you see, I knew it wouldn't happen anyway, so why bother? Or it's good that I didn't really put much effort into doing it anyway. The other one that we may be failing ahead as well is when we keep being in confusion a lot of the time. So let's say that, again, that's a goal, and we've developed a certain plan of how to achieve it, or even if it's not a plan, we have somehow set out certain map or roadmap to how to get there. And then as we go through those and start doing them, we put ourselves in this very confusing moment, or in this moment of, well, I don't know how to decide now, I don't know what to do here, I don't know what to do there. And then we just keep confusing ourselves to the point that we just keep losing time, we keep losing energy, and then we're not likely to get to where we want to go. This is another way that you can fail ahead of time. Another one would be forgetting to work on it, right? So in the biggest, I think, in my case at least, when I have done this to myself recently, the biggest thing that I have noticed is that whenever I want to do those things that I said I would do in order to achieve my goal, I noticed that I have a lot of great arguments as to why I don't really need to be doing this, or as to why it's better to change it, or it's why I shouldn't be obsessed with this. So my behavior is very obsessive, so I should stop obsessing with it. Even though I don't think I was even obsessing with it, I just I think my brain is so good at not purposely tricking myself, but rather coming up with lots of ideas and arguments as to why changing would be a good idea, why making it different would be a good idea, why focusing on something else would be a good idea. And whenever my brain comes up with these arguments, my reaction is immediately, yeah, it does make sense. Yes, it makes good sense to be doing something else, or it's better that I will be doing this, or it's better that I jump into something else, right? So you can see that my own self is creating these arguments as to why I shouldn't be working on this that I'm working on now. Now, of course, you could always argue and say, well, Estelle, what if you do really need to change some things in the middle of it? What if you do really changes or adapt things? And I can totally understand it. But if you're going to do that, do it after evaluating. So, in other words, not just listen to your very powerful arguments from your brain in your head and say, yeah, it's a good idea, let's just change it, let's just do it differently. Don't do that to yourself, because I have learned my bitter lesson that that's not helpful, and that's also a lot of the time in my head, and then later I won't remember those reasons why I did that, and they're not really based on anything tangible or anything of the evidence. So that's why do the evaluation of how things are going. Why do you think it needs to be changed? What are the evidence for changing it? And then afterwards, make that conscious decision to change it based on these reasons, and not just in your head automatically or intuitively wanting to change things here, change things there, out of hesitation, out of doubting yourself, right? So don't do that. Now, we are now at the point of talking about what to do, and I think that's one of the biggest things that we want to be watching out for, because failing ahead, as I said, is very subtle things that we may be doing that we don't even notice that we're doing it. And if we're not onto our own brains, we may be missing out on that information and then keep failing ahead of time, and not even get to our goal. And somewhere we even change our goal completely, and then we just don't achieve it, in the hope, I think subconsciously at least, in the hope of not being too disappointed at it, right? So you remember that our brains are always there wanting to protect us, not to suffer a lot. And even if we do suffer, not to the extent that our brains might think that we pass out or disappointment is too hard to handle and whatever. But from many disappointments that I have experienced in my life, and even humiliation and many other feelings, I know, at least for myself, that I don't pass out or I don't die, but my brain, of course, thinks that I may die, right? So that's why it's trying to protect myself by telling myself all these great arguments as to why I shouldn't really be pursuing that goal. Now, what to do? The biggest tool that obviously I use is coaching myself, right? So coaching myself, I do it every day, obviously, but you can do it when you have time. And if you can do that regularly, that's also great. And the way that you can coach, the easiest way you can coach is challenge your arguments when it comes up, or challenge your feelings when they come up. By challenging, I mean, if you are feeling hesitation, if you're feeling self-doubt and not wanting to pursue that goal, or wanting to pursue it in a modified version and different version, ask yourself, is that really necessary at this stage? Or you can wait until a certain point where you have gathered some data based on your plan. Because remember, you did the plan consciously, and you did the plan knowingly how you could get there. And even if that might have been a guess, it's okay. You can still follow that plan, get to the goal of actually achieving it, or the certain milestones that you have set for yourself after getting to that point, and then evaluate it. Right, so coach yourself on whether it really makes sense to be changing it, or you're just changing it to avoid feeling disappointment later. So you can always observe your thoughts, observe your feelings of how they are influencing you, how they are arguing with you to what to do and what to not to do, because maybe our brains in the long scheme of picture not wanting us to transition because of fear, right? And therefore our brains are trying to protect ourselves by not really saving up that money that we want to be transitioning, because if we save up that money, that would then get serious that we're actually doing something about it. And therefore, maybe our brains are trying to preempt things. And that's fine that our brains like to do that, because our brains like comfort. Our brains want to rather stay in the known rather than going to the unknown, right? So that's why we need to be thinking in the highest self, in the highest version of our thinking capacity, and looking at all of what's happening and then deciding for ourselves, or being onto ourselves and deciding what are you going to do with those suggestions that your brain might be bringing up as to you need to change this, you need to change that, whether it's really necessary to do that, or go through that process and get to that goal and learn, even if you didn't achieve it, learn so much about why you didn't achieve it, what were the reasons for not achieving it, instead of just telling yourself, oh, I changed it in the middle and now I don't know what would have happened if I had followed my plan. Right? Does that make sense? I hope that what I'm saying makes sense. So the first is definitely coaching yourself. And if you are not able to coach yourself effectively, or if you're not seeing things the way that you want to understand and get clear on it, of course, you let me know. I'll be happy to help you coach on this topic. And then the second thing you can always tell your brain is that you are wanting to transition for a reason, and you are clear and you like your reasons why you're doing it, right? Whatever those reasons are. And even if you do fail, let's say, in transitioning, and you experience a lot of disappointment, a lot of damages, or whatever it is that your brain might be thinking that you may experience it, you can always come back if you wanted to. And you know, your brain might be saying that, well, after transitioning, things might be worse than it's here now. Obviously, we don't know that, but even if that was the case, we can always come back to where we are now. And it's not like someone is blocking our road, but we may not be able to know is what happens after if we actually do it. What if it's actually a lot better there? Or what if actually that's where we truly achieve what we want? That's where we're truly able to live our potential, our life in the fulfilling way that we want. And what if that life is only away from, you know, away from you completing that goal, you achieving that goal in the meantime. And that's why when you look at it, when you tell your brain that you have these options and you can always come back, or when you can always choose to go and continue. You can always transition to something, a third option. And you can always try to do that, but decide and commit and make it work, right? Remember that whenever we are trying to fail ahead, we're doing the work half-heartedly, we're not really committed, we're not really believing that that's what we can do. So that's why when we are telling ourselves that we have several options, then we can commit to whatever the option that we've decided to go for and commit to making it work. Commit to realizing that the result that we're pursuing is within our reach, within our control. How are we getting that? And it's within our control, even if it involves being interviewed by other people, by other institutions, or seeking other jobs. What if we approached it from the commitment, from the belief that it's within our control? How much more we could have done, right? So that's why, to sum up, in order not to fail ahead, I suggest you coach yourself on observing your mind, observing your thoughts and feelings. And whenever you have those feelings of hesitation, self-doubt, ask yourself, is it really good to be changing things out of those feelings? Second, you can always give yourself the options, so you can always come back if you wanted to. You have other options to go for, so it's not like you will die after transitioning if your brain's trying to protect you very hard and allowing you to fail in advance, right? And then third, making a decision on whichever the path you want to go, making a decision that you will make it work no matter what. You are willing to fail and finding out how that's going to go. You are willing to experience that disappointment if necessary, because it's rather, I would rather we experience a disappointment after having tried than experiencing the disappointment before having tried, right? Because we may be experiencing already the disappointment without even us realizing it if we keep failing ourselves ahead of time. But if we have failed after having done the work, then we know at least how we did it, why we couldn't do it, what are the reasons why we didn't achieve it, and that's important information to get to learn our lessons and then continue doing our work again and again until we get the results. So, having said that, this failing ahead concept comes from my coach, Brooke Castillo, and I have just elaborated to the context that we're doing now, and also talked to you from my experience of how I have dealt with it and how I have made the decision to continue. So if you really want your goal to be achieved, you need to be committed to achieving it. You need to put the effort to achieving it, and you need to believe that you can achieve it instead of allowing yourself to fail ahead. Okay, my friends, have a beautiful, beautiful, peaceful in heart weekend, and I'll talk to you next Friday.